Hey everybody, I'm MS Farzan, and welcome back to this video series on learning C# and Unity for digital tabletop game development. We've done some work to create tokens on our screen when we start playing our Unity game scene, and we've also created a couple scripts to help with our functionality, like if we want to have multiple tokens on screen that we can use in our digital tabletop game development. Let's, in this video, check out some ways to improve the functionality of our game so that we have a button that, when pushed, allows us to instantiate those game objects on the screen so that it doesn't just happen when the game starts. And also create a drag and drop script so that we can drag our tokens around the screen, or maybe they're cards or some sort of profile pics of our characters, or however you have them represented in your game. And we'll have a much more interactive type of game than what we've had previously. Let's get started by just taking a look at our scripts and where we are right now. We have a game manager script attached to our game manager here in the hierarchy. And if we open that game manager script, we see that it handles most of the functionality of what's happening in this game. During the start method, we have our create tokens function being run, which, if this Boolean is true, which that's just this fake thing that we put in there to learn about Booleans. We run a for loop to create a number of tokens on the screen and set them at the origin with a little bit of an offset so that they appear to the right of the origin when we establish that the game has started. Let's just play that and see what happens. When I click play, it opens up my game scene, and I see that we've not only moved the X, but we've also moved the Y coordinates so that they're kind of staggered diagonally across the screen. Let's just clean that up a little bit so that they're more horizontal across the screen and a little bit more evenly spaced. And the way that we'll do that is just changing, well, we don't need to really change the Y coordinates of this. If I'm thinking of like putting a bunch of cards right on the table, like I'm dealing a hand, or just tokens right in front of me. Maybe I just want the x-axis, the x coordinates to change, but I just want the y coordinate to be the same. So let's keep this second coordinate, which is the y coordinate, at 0 of our vector 2 here within our instantiate method. And then rather than having it be, as we've noticed that with this, in the previous video, when we instantiate a token, we put it at this vector 2 at the origin at 0, 0, or the x coordinate is 0 and the y coordinate is 0. We change that to I times 150 so that the first time this loop is run, it'll be 0 times 150. So that will be at the 0 coordinate, because 0 times 150 is 0. And then each time it loops over, this for loop loops over this block of code, we're going to increase or increment that value by 150 pixels, or by unit, what Unity serves for pixels in Unity as units of measurement. And instead of that, let's say that instead of we want it to be 0 times 150, let's say that we want it to be negative 150 plus I times 150. Make sure there are parentheses around everything. We're saying that we want to start not at 0, we want to start at negative 150, which signifies that the origin is right here in the middle of the screen. And instead of starting there in terms of our x coordinates, we want to start a little bit to the left. Let's see what happens this time. Great. So we've moved everything over from the middle of the screen to a little bit over to the left. And that's because the way that Unity treats this is that when if we have the origin at 0, 0, if we make a positive adjustment to that origin in terms of the coordinates, like positive x, that's going to move to the right, to the right, and positive y would go up, whereas negative x will go to the left, and negative y will go downwards. So we've moved it about 150, exactly 150 pixels to the left, but we want to move it quite a bit further than that. So let's just pick an arbitrary number, and we'll say negative 1,000, and see where that puts us. Okay, that was way too far. So we can just keep, you can either like do the math yourself and figure out exactly where you want it, or you can do as I do and just kind of like trial and error your way until it looks good enough, at least for a prototype. When you need to be a little bit more exact, you can definitely do some work to do that and just do a little bit of arithmetic to get it in the right place. Right now we're doing at minus 450 is where we're going to start. And that looks more or less good, but for my OCD eyes, it's not quite enough yet to fool me into thinking that it's perfect. So, okay, we're starting at minus 400, and that looks a little bit over to the left, but it's good enough. And let's say we wanted to be a little bit further down so that, let's say, I'm playing a hand of tokens to myself, and you're up top here. I'm representing you up at the top of the game board. I want you to be dealt the same amount at some point. So let me move these tokens downwards a little bit just by saying, similar to the x coordinate, I'm going to say minus 400 plus I, oops, no, I just need to say minus 400 because I'm not changing the y coordinate at all. And what did I do wrong? I forgot. I added an extra parentheses here. Okay, that looks pretty good. That looks more natural, like what a game board would look like. Cool. But my game might not start with my tokens on the board. So let's add a button that improves the functionality of our game and allows us to start the game when we're ready to start. The way we're going to do that is just show what's going on our main canvas. We just have this background right now, and you'll recall that when we play the game, we've parented the tokens to the main canvas so that it can be seen above the background. We're going to add a game object. We're going to drop down to the UI menu and add a button. That immediately adds it under the main canvas here, and we see that there's this button here called button. If I zoom in, you can see that it has a text called button. And I'm going to drag it over to the side here, just in some place that's kind of off the side of the game board. Wherever you want to put it is fine. And we'll look at a few different things here. One, we'll look at the button has, if we look at it in the inspector, it has an image, and it has the button, which is a script itself. And it has this little field which says on click, and it says list is empty. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. The thing we don't notice is where can we change the text for this button so it doesn't say button. Well, if you look at the button that's been created in your sample scene, it has a little arrow next to it, which means that I can expose a text element that is actually a child of the button. And when I click on that text element, it has the text here that I can change. I can add, I can move the position, I can change the font and the style and the color and everything. Right now I just want to change the text, and I'll call it deal cards. And now you'll see that it says that on the button right there. Cool. Clicking back over to my button. What I want to become familiar with and comfortable with is that in programming, a lot of times when you click a button or something, you'll hear on click. That's shorthand for this is what the functionality I want to happen when the button is clicked. And so if I add to this list, it gives me of an empty field, and it says runtime only and no function. This just means that I need to provide a script to tell Unity what I want it to do when this button is clicked. And I haven't created that script yet, so I'm going to go ahead and do that here in my script folder that I have in the project pane. I'll say create C# script, and I'll call that the draw cards script. Let me double click on this and open it, and we see that I have just a blank script here. And what I need to think through is what I want the functionality of this script to do. Well, I basically want it to take over what's happening in this create tokens function that I have in my game manager script. So you might say, okay, well, let me just move everything over, all of this code over into the draw card script, and have that be, and Bob's your uncle, have that just be the end of it. That might be something I want to do, but maybe I, for whatever reason, want my game manager to handle this logic for me. And that's no problem. We can do that by changing this create tokens function from a private one into a public one. When I do that, it exposes the function to be able to be used or accessed by other scripts and other objects within my game scene. Similar to how we're looking for a public game object called token and a public game object called canvas. In the draw card script, I'm going to say public game object, no, public game manager, game manager. I'm going to declare a public game manager called game manager. Remember how we talked about how in Unity there are several different types of, several different types or data types. We first dealt with integers and strings, and then we talked about booleans, and said that Unity also has a type called game object. Well, we can create our own types, our own classes by creating these scripts. Like GameManager.cs is not only a script, it's also a class in Unity. It's a C# class, as is noted at the top of the script. We have a public class game manager that derives from monobehavior, the base class in Unity. When I say in my draw card script, public game manager, that means I want to find a public game manager that's called game manager. I don't need a game object, I need a game manager, which is the script attached to this game manager object that we see here. And the way that we're going to get that game manager script is we're going to find it at runtime when the game starts. We're going to say in the start method, game manager is equal to game object dot find in parentheses and quotation marks game manager, which we'll see that's the name of my object here. But remember, I don't need the object, I need the script attached to it, which is a component. So I'm going to say game object dot find game manager dot get component game manager. And then the parentheses afterwards lets Unity know that that's a function. Or the function is game object dot find or get component. That's the function, and I want to get the type of component called game manager. Now I can access anything public within that game manager script. That might be this public, any of the public variables that I've declared. It certainly is going to be this create tokens method. And so I don't need the I don't need the update method. I definitely need the start method to find the game manager. But what I need to do is establish an onClick function. So I'm going to say public void onClick. You can actually call it whatever you want. But remember, we're attached to the button. I'm going to say public void onClick. When somebody clicks this button, I want to run game manager dot what do we call it? Create tokens. And do we have, yeah, we have an integer that's passed in, and we said 6 before, so let's do that again. And then we'll remove it from our start function here so that it doesn't actually happen based in our game manager script. Instead, when somebody clicks the draw cards button, it should say we should instead already know where the game manager is in our hierarchy, and when they click, it's going to run game manager.create tokens, and it's going to pass in 6 as an argument and say I want 6 tokens, which is pretty cool. But we haven't done enough for this to actually work yet. If I went and press play, we'll see that there's nothing on my screen anymore because we're not instantiating the tokens at runtime. And I click deal cards and nothing happens because even though I've created a script for it, I haven't made any connective tissue so that the button knows what it's supposed to do. And so one thing we can do, for example, is drag the draw cards script. Well, let's find our button. Click the button here. And either we can add a component or we can just drag the draw card script onto this object right in a little space here. And now, because the button, this might sound a little weird, because the button has the draw card script on it, I can now drag the button into this field where it's looking for an object. And by doing that, it exposes it. Well, it unhides this drop-down menu over here, and I can click on it and select the draw card script, and then select on click. It's kind of like this field on the button requires a game object that has a script on it to be dragged onto it, or you can even click this little circle next to it to choose one in your assets folder, so that it can access the script that's attached to that game object. And then by doing that and making it public, I can then click on the drop-down menu, find my draw card script, and then find the on-click function that we declared. And when I hit play and hit deal cards, I see that it works just great. If I clicked it again, the same thing would happen, but now these are the tokens are populating on top of the other tokens, so we don't see them. But what we wanted to happen is happening, which is awesome. Now that we have a button, we can manipulate all kinds of things that we want to appear on screen, which is very cool. But we still can't interact with these tokens at all, which isn't a good look, because unless we just want to draw cards or draw tokens all day, we are not really having much of a game that we can play. So let's figure out how to do that. The objective of drawing cards or drawing tokens and dragging them, that may not seem like much business to have to encounter, but it is actually a little bit complicated to drag and drop things in Unity 2D. There are some other frameworks and engines that do it a little bit more elegantly, but this is the solution that I've come up with in having a way to drag and drop things on the canvas around the screen. If you're dealing with other types of objects that aren't nested within the canvas or other canvas elements, you might see different ways of doing this. Specifically, I'm thinking of, I think it's the Unity has a template for this, or some sort of package that you can download to see how they do it. And it's much more complex than this. But I also think they're dealing with other types of objects and not canvas objects, but I wouldn't quote me on that. The point is that it's complicated, and this is the best way I've figured out how to do it. So your mileage may vary. We're going to create a new script that's just called drag drop. And we're going to find our prefab, the token, open it in the inspector, and this time instead of dragging the script, we'll just say add component, and we can search for drag drop, and we'll just add it there. And I want to edit this script. One way of doing that is to right click it in the inspector and hit edit script. Any old way will do. And now that I have this new script, I'm going to, at the top of it, declare a public game object called canvas, like we did in our game manager script. A private Boolean is dragging. I make that false. You'll recall a Boolean is a data type that is either true or false. It has two different values. And right now at the start of the game, or when this drag drop script comes into creation, the Boolean is going to be set to false. We'll see why in just a moment. We're also going to declare what's called a private void awake. The awake function is similar to the start function, although if I hover over the start function, we see start is called just before any of the update methods is called the first time. Whereas awake is called when the script instance is being loaded. So it happens actually before start. So in our case, there's really no reason for us to use it. It's just that I want you to be to know that that it exists and it's something that you can use. And something that I realized that I haven't mentioned at all is these little green lines. These are just comments. If you need a comment, you can just write // and then whatever you type within or on this line is a comment. And the Unity compiler won't, the C# compiler won't, will know that it's a comment and it doesn't try and do anything with that code. If you have a multi-line comment, you can say / asterisk and then write stuff. And then on the next, whenever you want it to end, you can just say star / and then anything here is a comment as well. So I'm sure you've come across this already, and this is probably very pedantic just to tell you, but I figure I should mention it. In any case, so we have this awake function, and just for kicks, we're going to, within it, instead of the start function, we're going to say canvas is equal to GameObject.find main canvas. And I'm going to double check that that's what I've called my canvas. Yeah. So we're going to find the main canvas. I don't need my start function. Okay. So what do we want to do here? We want to make sure that when during the update method, if I click on one of these tokens, let me run the game so you can see. If I click on one of these tokens, I need to make sure that the computer knows, Unity knows that I've clicked on it and that I'm holding it, and that when I let go, it shouldn't be dragging anymore. I also want that when I click on it and hold and start moving it around, I want it to follow my mouse position. I want the object to follow my mouse position wherever it goes. And when I drop it, I want it to drop wherever I stopped holding the mouse button down. So in my update method, which you'll recall is being called once per frame, as it says right up there in the comment, I want to say if is dragging. If we're dragging, remember that means this is shorthand for saying if is dragging equals true. But I don't need to write all that. I can just say if is dragging, curly braces, transform.position equals new vector2. And in the parentheses, as the arguments, I'm for the x and y coordinates, I'm going to say input dot mouse position dot x, comma input dot mouse position dot y. And I'm going to say transform dot set parent, and in parentheses canvas dot transform, comma true. I'm really excited to share why there's so much cool stuff in this little block of code. First of all, when we just say transform.position, remember we did this in the game manager script where we said token.getComponent transform.setParent, and then we said canvas.transform false. Well, when I just say transform.position, that is a shorthand way of saying, as I hover over with my mouse, the transform attached to this game object. Whenever you say transform.position from within a script that's attached to the game object, Unity understands that you mean the transform of the game object that this script is attached to. Sometimes you'll see, we don't need to really use it here, but we can say game object, lowercase game object.transform, and that means this game object that is attached to, or as the tooltip says, the game object this component is attached to. A component is always attached to a game object. Thanks, Unity, for that helpful advice. So I'm saying I want the transform, the position of the transform, which regulates the size and the location of the game object. I want to change its position to a new vector2, which takes an XY coordinate, and this is Unity's way of saying the X and Y of wherever the mouse is. The current mouse position in pixel coordinates. And then I want to set the parent of the transform to the canvas, the transform of the canvas, similar as we did to the game manager to make it. You'll recall that when we were instantiating these tokens, they weren't being parented to the canvas and we couldn't see them. We're doing the same thing here, but for a different reason. And we'll see. Actually, we'll try it both ways so that you can see what the difference is. But the reason is that if I want to make sure that the token is the closest to the screen and doesn't go behind other objects, it's important that I do that by parenting it to the canvas first. And then it's the thing that's closest to my eyeballs on the screen. And in this case, I'm saying true as the second argument for this set parent method, which is different from the way we did it in the game manager. And you'll recall because when we set the parent of the transform to the canvas, we're saying we don't want it to stay in the same world position. We want it to be wherever we tell it to be. Whereas we want the transform of the game object, in this case when we're dragging it, to stay true to wherever it already was. So we don't want to move it around even though we're parenting it to a different parent, which is the canvas. Cool. So that's what happens if it's dragging, but how do we determine if the game object is being dragged? We haven't set up that logic yet. We need to create our own function here, and we'll call it a public void start drag, because we want it to be accessible outside of our script, similar to how we did the draw cards button script. And when start drag is called, we want to say simply is dragging is equal to true. So when somebody clicks and starts dragging, we just want to say is dragging is true, and then that will waterfall to the update method where if this game object is being dragged, we can move it around on screen. And we also need a public void end drag function where we say is dragging equal to false. Cool. So great. We've attached it to our attached the script to our token, and yet we're still not done yet. And I'll prove it to you. When I hit play and I hit draw cards and I try to drag, nothing happens. And that's because in the relationship that we saw with the button and the script that we attach to it, we need to connect what's happening in the Unity editor with what's happening in our scripts. The way we do that in this case is we add another component, which is called an event trigger. And you'll recall I'm on the token prefab, which will apply to all instances of the token that are instantiated by Unity. And I'm going to add a new event type, and I'm going to call it begin drag, and add another event type, which is end drag. And just want you to see that when I click event type, I could do pointer enter or pointer exit. That's like if I hover over an object, I want it to change colors, and when I exit, I want it to change back colors. It could be pointer down, like when I just click something. It could be while I'm dragging. It could be when I've selected something. So there are many different events that you could create in this event trigger script. But in my begin drag, I'm going to add an event, and I'm going to do the same in the end drag. And just like the previous escapade with the button, I need to drag the token, which has the script attached to it, into these fields so that I can just then grab within this dropdown. I can go into the drag drop script, and for the begin drag function, I'll use my start drag begin drag event. I'll use my start drag function. I guess I could call them both begin drag to have a little bit more similarity there. And in the end drag, I'm going to click the drop down, go to drag drop, which is my script that I've attached, and find the end drag function. Okay, and now that I've tied all these things together, I'm going to hit play and hit deal cards. And now I can move this, every one of these around just fine. Just like that. Now, in the case that I'm not able to, just to show you that I didn't, let's say that I didn't parent this correctly. Let's say instead of transform.setParent and setting it to the canvas, let's say I didn't do that. Let's say I commented out, so now this code is no longer viable. I hit play and I hit deal cards. Well, in this case, my everything is actually working just fine because all these things are white. So like if, for example, let's say I moved this button. Remember how we said that whatever's lower on the hierarchy is actually closer to your eyeballs? If I move this button underneath the tokens and then try and drag this, any of these things around it, it goes underneath the deal cards button, which is not ideal. And that's the reason for which when we hit play, when we uncomment this and we hit play and then hit deal cards, we see that all of the tokens are parented to the main canvas. And when I'm dragging, we ensure that if it was not parented to the main canvas, let's say you had like an icon down here that signified somebody's hand or they're part of their game board, want to make sure that we parent it to the canvas when it's dragging so that it is the closest thing to your eyeballs and it doesn't look weird as though you're dragging it underneath other objects in the scene. What's cool also about Unity is that when you're actually running a scene and as you've clicked play and you're playing your game, you can move all this stuff around as you like, and when you unclick play, it just goes back to normal, so you don't have to change that. But this is really cool. We've added a draw card script, or I guess it could be called draw token script in this video, and we've also added a drag drop script so that now when we hit play, we're able to control when the cards or tokens are being drawn, and we're also able to add a little bit of functionality with dragging and dropping these tokens across the screen at will, which is really cool. You should give yourself a pat on the back. And what I'd recommend doing is taking some time to personalize this, maybe make card shapes instead of tokens, or set up your game board the way that you want with your user interface, or do something different with the events or the buttons, or see if you can add a different type of event that changes the color of something when you hover over it, or really anything at all. In fact, I think that you're well primed to take on another one of my video series, which is how to create a multiplayer 2D card game in Unity using the canvas and a lot of the stuff that we've been working on so far. I'll link that in the description to this video so you can check it out. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please go ahead and like it and subscribe to my channel. I'd also love for you to check out my books and games at entromancy.com or nightpathpub.com/entromancy. I'm really excited about them, and I'd love for help getting the word out, so please tell someone about them, and we'll see you soon.